All right. Hey, welcome back to the Go for CEO channel. This is John the Bomb. Building others means business. And look, as always, I tend to bring you the most dynamic people, right? And on this channel, we're learning how CEOs, founders, entrepreneurs are really building, scaling, growing organically, getting loans, operating their business, the cash flow cycle of your business, the scaling and the employee challenges and all those things. Well, look, I've got a pretty big winner here. So Amy Williams, I got a chance to meet on Clubhouse, the app, and over a year later, I finally got her on the channel, and you're going to be super excited because she is the founder and CEO of AB Unlimited worldwide. So you're talking to a business that does business all around the world. She's actually in Canada right now at one of her homes. So super excited to have you, Miss Amy Williams. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day here in British Columbia, and I'm looking out, seeing bright blue sky, some clouds, some green, and some ocean.
Well, I love the humble brag. So, well, awesome, awesome. And look, ladies and gentlemen, the cool thing about this world that we live in is that we'll meet people online, we'll form relationships, we'll form communication, we'll form just connections. And then all of a sudden, every once in a while, you get a chance for that person that you either fly into their town or they fly into your town. And 2 weeks ago, I had the humbling experience to meet Amy and some of the other people that we've had a chance to really make some connections. So again, I'm super excited. So let's dive into it. AB Unlimited Worldwide. Amy, we like to always share, that ideation stage. How did you start thinking about this business? Where did it come from? Where did you come from? Corporate, all that type of stuff. And give us a little insight of kind of those beginning days of how you thought the idea. And then obviously we'll share with the audience the different other dynamics of the business. So take it away.
Thank you so much. It was really, we just fell into it, but it really stemmed from a vision that my husband, Brian Williams, had. He came to me in 2007 and said, he was a very successful print salesman, did pre-press, worked with all the studios, worked with all the major advertising agencies for pre-press. And he came to me one day and he said, you know what, Amy, print is dying. And if
Mm.
we want to keep our nice lifestyle, we have to make some changes. And at the time, I was practicing law. I was working for a medium-sized firm. I was of counsel for another firm shortly after that. And to be quite honest, I was getting burnt out practicing, and I wanted to change. And I thought Brian was crazy. I told him that, and I was super unsupportive of him building a company based on the knowledge and the skill set that he already had. And funnily enough, fast forward 7 months after this conversation, I'm standing in Times Square and I'm standing next to a bus shelter. And usually bus shelters have the product that Brian works on. It's usually movie posters or something of the sort. And I call Brian up on my pink Razor flip phone, if you remember those. And I
Mhm.
said, Brian, I'm standing in Times Square. I'm standing next to a bus shelter, and you're not going to believe what I'm looking at. He goes, what are you looking at? I said, I'm not looking at a movie poster. I'm looking at a digital TV screen. And
Mhm.
he was quiet for a moment and he says, now do you get it? And I said, oh man, yes. And a year later, the core values of AB Unlimited was formed, and he formed the company. And our first client was Sony Studios. And then it just referrals, and he was really good at what he does. And Brian, just has an eye for color and has an eye for production management. So, basically acting as an offsite extension of our clients' marketing departments, managing their print, managing their marketing collateral, 3 a.m. press checks, 12 a.m. press checks, but it was great. And the company was very successful. So where I came in is I was still practicing law at the time, but because corporate law and breach of contract were my specialties, I was able to come in, structure the company, get our first SBA loan. And, it was great for 2 years. And then the 2011 recession or crash or whatever you want to call it, the fallout is what we say, print really did die. And some of the largest print manufacturers went out of business in the United States. Why? Because everything was being converted to digital. All of a sudden, those books that car dealers had, where you could build your own car and pick your accessories for your car, no longer were being printed. Those were being online built. So you could go online to a website, build the car of your dreams, press click, order it, and there you go. So a lot of print companies went out of business, and the prediction that Brian had in 2007 came true. So we saw a little bit of a slump, but one of our favorite clients was the NFL Network, and our company, AB Unlimited, did the graphics and did the print collateral for the sets. And all of a sudden we were told, hey, Burger King wants to sponsor this segment, but they want mugs with their logo on it, and we want our logo on it too. Can you handle it? And Brian's like, sure. Had no idea what we were doing, but he knew a friend that did, and that's all that mattered. And so pretty soon we were, selling promotional products as an add-on value to some of our largest print clients. And one day Brian was handling a project for the LA Marathon, and he ordered, 50,000 bags. And funnily enough, I walked in, I was on a sabbatical from practicing law, and I said, hey, this is cool. Where'd you get this bag? How much did it cost? And, it didn't take rocket science. I figured out how much that bag really cost. I saw what we were paying, saw what we sold it for, and it was fine, but there was money being left on the table. So I looked at Brian and I said, you're leaving money on the table. And he looks me dead in the eye and he says, handle it. And 4 months later, we opened up a division of promotional products. I had no clue what I was doing. So I had to get advisors. I had to attend every webinar that I could find. We joined the appropriate associations, and all of a sudden our little division was 30% of our revenue. And today it's 90% of our revenue.
Wow. What a conversion, right? And insight, right? I think both you and Brian really had these kind of, you had an insightful moment, right? Standing at that Times Square bus location, and then he kind of was forecasting it, right? What a cool union. So help me understand here. Obviously he had been in that print space. Actually, the other day was at a newsstand by happenstance inside of a Jewel, and I saw the Chicago Tribune that used to be like this big and this thick, is like literally a little square. I was like, I hadn't even ever noticed that.
Yep.
How small it is now. So it's like a little mini kid book almost. But so you saw an opportunity, right? Tell our community and Go for CEO, because I think that's one of the things is you mentioned, hey, well, Brian knew someone, and then I took 4 months and I dove into it. So what was some of the research, some of the ways that you got in? You mentioned associations. How did you find that to be effective to really start to then be able to be aware of how to source it, how to grow it, how to get the clients, all that type of stuff?
So it was interesting because my first association that we joined was Printing Association in Southern California. And I went to every webinar they had, and they had a little offshoot called Women in Print. And even though we did have a print brokerage, we were also doing promotional products, which is a different animal than actual ink on paper printing. But I attended every single one of their webinars. And one of the most impactful webinars that I remember attending was a woman who owned a printing company in Southern California. And it was the good, the bad, and the ugly of being an entrepreneur, of what happens. That 2011 recession that I spoke about really hit her hard. And, she said, there are tough decisions that you have to make. Yes, this is your service. This is what you provide to the world, but you're also wearing another hat, and that's as owner. And there are things that you need to realize as owner, and things that you need to do as owner, decisions that you have to make as owner that have nothing to do with the product that you're selling to your client. So it really opened my eyes to, okay, we need to find out what's going on. How can we make this foundation the structure of our company? How can we make sure that we're on solid ground? And I just asked people for help, and people wanted to give me help. Besides the SBA loan that we had, we one of our first mentors was at Disney. And there are two individuals at Disney that really took us under their wing and said, hey, this is what you need to do. And the first woman, her name was Arnice Lamb, and she was a beautiful woman who took the time for a little vendor. We were nobodies, right? She took the time to really counsel us, and she has since passed, but I will never forget the lessons that our mentors gave us. And the first thing that she said was, Amy, you need to get a hold of your supply chain. then come back and see me. And so that's what we did. Our particular company is different than most promo companies because we only work with 30 suppliers. We don't have time to babysit. We don't have time to deal with code red projects. We want to make sure that our supply chain is handled and that when I pick up the phone and they see it's Amy calling, they answer it and they said, okay, let's figure this out. And that is one of our biggest KPIs, to be honest, not our revenue. It's our interaction with our supply chain.
That's so interesting, right? So did you take the approach of not only calling, but did you visit? Did you do walkthroughs? How did you start to determine from probably a few hundred, I would think, suppliers that are out there that are in this marketplace to determine who you were gonna, I guess, put a standard of the way that you did and wanted to do business?
We do walkthroughs. In fact, all of our suppliers, I would think with the exception of maybe 2 that I have not done a walkthrough, we have met personally with their executive team, oftentimes with the owner. There was one supplier that we do business with where we actually played on a softball team with him for many years. So I'm on a first name basis with really the top team of these suppliers because you have to be. It's the relationship that move mountains when you have a difficult project. And that's one thing that I learned. And one of my favorite suppliers, I remember meeting with the executive VP of that particular supplier. We had a project that was snake bit. And it just, no matter what we did, this project was not working out. And I was mad. And I was really, I was like, one of those people saying, yeah, what's going on and da da da, and just going off the rails. And he sat me down and he goes, you know what, Amy, we're a partner to you and you're a partner to us. And there are certain things that are going to happen with projects. And you have to decide, is this something that you're going to throw a relationship over because of a mistake, even though it was a hefty mistake? Or do you have that relationship and value that person and try to work on a solution together? And I never forgot that advice because he was so right. And I've always carried that lesson number 2 with me for the last 10 years, because when something goes, everybody's your best friend when something goes right. Are they your best friend when something goes wrong? How do you handle that situation? How do you handle the crisis management? For an order for promotional products, for a large company, they're ordering thousands and thousands of units, hundreds of thousands of dollars are on the line. How do you handle that resolution? So one of those lessons that I learned early on was really valuing that give and take with our supply chain. And that's why they're the most important thing. They're the most important thing in our world.
No, yeah, I mean, it's truly the lifeblood of your business, right? And you decided at a very early stage to really have, it sounds like a truly impactful relationship, a magnetic one, but then also when you thought the bandwidth of problem through, it sounded like not only from a mentor perspective or just a good, great supplier shared with you an idea, and then you kind of, seems like you learned from that and be able to then have a resolution for stuff, right? So, so just to take it back a little bit, you mentioned SBA. I happen to be in that game. So I'd love to just understand, because I think that beginning part is really interesting, right? You had Brian make the decision. You guys have this epiphany with you in New York. You start the business. It's mostly in his space. And then you brought a dynamic to that. But from the beginning of kind of the outlay of funds, was the SBA integral in the way that you started the business for working capital, for the way that you, I guess, got some initial inventory in? How did that work for you?
Well, we didn't actually get the SBA loan until 4 years after we opened up the company. So we
Oh,
were
wow.
self-funded, and we
Oh,
started
wow.
our company with an $11,000 credit limit credit card. And that's
Okay.
how we started the company. And, we lived in an area of Los Angeles where we didn't want to leave. It was a nice place, and we liked what we saw when we looked outside, and a studio apartment became available, in the same neighborhood. And we thought, this would be really cool. We could walk across the street and have our office. So we spoke with the landlord, and they're like, happy to have, a responsible, person that we know on our block. So we rented that little studio apartment, and that was our first office. And so we've been spoiled. We've never commuted for our job ever. We always make sure that we have a location that's close to home. And then in 2015, we went remote. But back to your original question, we were up for a seven-figure contract in 2013. And at the time, I was going through the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program. And that program gave me the courage to apply for this bid. Everybody said, you're never going to get it. They're going to go with the incumbent. Don't even bother. You're never going to get it. Even the sales coach that I hired to help me, because I felt like I was not, I had no confidence when it came to sales. And, that's a story for later in this hour, but, we won the bid, and all of a sudden we had a seven-figure contract that we had to service. How are we going to service? Do we have the infrastructure to service? Because at the time we were doing great. We had a staff of 3, and, we needed to have, more manpower. We needed to increase our credit limits with our supply chain. Maybe they weren't willing to do that. We needed to make sure that we were able to fund these contracts. So I graduated from the Goldman Sachs program. And at the end of that program, we had put together what was called a growth plan. And I walked into Chase Bank with this growth plan. And I said, I would like a line of credit for $250,000. Please and thank you. They looked at my growth plan and they're like, okay, can we get your tax returns for the last 3 years? Can we get this, this, and this? And a week later, we were funded for $250,000. So having preparation, knowing what to do in that situation, knowing how to go into the bank and talk their language, because I could have not had any of that education and walked into the bank and said, yeah, Brian and I have this company, and yeah, can you loan us $250,000, line of credit? And they're going to look at us like we're from Mars. So packaging yourself, packaging your requests became very, very important. And to this day, this is something that we do when we're negotiating with whatever it is that we happen to be negotiating for.
No, I love it. I think, having at the round table, it sounded like you had the right people, not only from a mentorship, but you were spending money in the educational process of it as you were growing. You did that sabbatical. I'm assuming obviously there was that time period of really diving into the webinars and the things that you talked about and building your infrastructure of your network. I always talk to business owners saying, hey, look, if you have a traditional banker, that's all right, but you want to have someone that really could sit at the table with you, the CPA, the attorney, the banker, and really strategize your cash flow cycle and what's going on. How do you receive receivables, payables, and are you going to be able to grow through that? I was saying offline that I met with a gentleman that's have some super growth right now, and they're doing everything organically and bootstrapping stuff, which they have the margins for. But at one point or another, that stifles growth if you can't do lending and leverage, right? So really cool stuff. So tell us a little bit about how you've grown your portfolio. You decided that, from a vendor perspective, you have 30, you vetted them out, you did this really cool mindset behind why you wanted to do that. How about your clients? Who are you going after? What are some of the ways that you strategically started at the beginning? It sounded like you had some big names at the beginning. Have you stayed at that big name level, or have you been open to, working with all types of businesses?
We decided early on what we wanted to be involved with, what projects excited us. When you first open your company, you take whatever comes in the door because that's how you make money. And we did have some very good referrals. We had a lot of champions in our corner. And that was really what helped propel us to that next level. And, we kept seeing growth every 18 months. We were going through growing pains, and it became evident that our processes were not helping us, and they were no longer serving us as we kept going through these growing pains every 18 months. And we've had some major disasters, go through. So it was about 2015 where Brian and I sat down and said, okay, who on our roster of clients are profitable? What are we doing that's making them profitable for us? And what are the clients that are not profitable for us? So we went through this list and we cut 30% of our client roster. It was a very scary feeling to do that, but we did it. And we were able to focus on the ones that were profitable and figure out what is the secret sauce for that. Once we figured out the secret sauce for those clients, we went after more clients of that type. Then we said, okay, and this took us 3 years. It took us 3 years to really, really fine tune our customer persona. I can tell you what purse my female clients wear. I can tell you what car they drive. I can tell you where they eat, where they shop. Do they have a house? Do they have a mortgage? Are they college educated? Like, we really drilled down. And then we said, okay, where do these clients play? Let's go play in their sandbox. We figured out where they play. And then we started sponsoring events in their sandbox, conferences, events, whatever it is that they had, we became a part of their world so that we became a trusted expert in their field of vision, the one that they turn to when they're in need for marketing collateral. So that's kind of the genesis of how we built. And once we did that, boom, we saw another skyrocket, in terms of scaling. And thank God for our advisors, because nobody has a roadmap on being an entrepreneur. Nobody has a how-to book on running, being an entrepreneur 101. It's really trial by fire, and it's a very, very scary feeling.
No, you talk about those first 3 years, right, and developing that persona. So I'd like to go a little bit deeper on one area that you talked about. So you said you identified where your buyers were hanging out, where they like to hang, be with or socialize, those types of things. So tell us a little bit about that, because that's truly networking. That's truly putting dollars where you need to spend money at for your own advertising, right? So can you give us a little bit more insight? Like, you identified XYZ, and then what did you do? How did you go to that space? Was it only because you then sponsored a table, or how was that dynamic?
As simple as that. As simple as that. And I can give you an example that happened literally this last year. We exhibited in a vertical that in the education vertical that we are very heavily in. We're experts in university purchasing. And we happened to go to one event, showed up with our table and our backdrop and our complete setup for exhibiting. And, we've done this for a while, so we know what pain points are already there in our industry, because it's literally the same pain points for everyone. And having a good heart and coming from a place of empathy and coming from a place of authenticity really goes a long way. And one of the first lessons that I learned in sales, and this is where I want to go back to that sales story that I mentioned earlier, is I had no confidence when it came to sales. And so I hired these sales coaches, and I would constantly run to my partner, Brian, and saying, how do I do this? And what do I say? And he's like, you know what, Amy, I don't want you to talk about product when you go into a meeting. I don't want you to bring up the company. I want you to go in there and I want you to make a friend. And I thought, okay. And then he says, besides, you're a kick-ass salesperson anyway. And I'm like, how do you figure? He's like, Amy, for 10 years, you walked into a court of law and you sold the judge on what ruling you wanted to walk out with. Did you not? And I was like, oh my God, you're right. I did do that. And then all of a sudden it kind of switched for us. So when we go into what I call our clients, sandbox, we go in not trying to sell product. We go in trying to make a friend and listening to what it is that they want to accomplish, and then giving them solutions to what they want to accomplish with a creative twist. A lot of people in our space, they just sell. We're more consultants. We're more agency style, which is why we're AB Unlimited Worldwide Marketing Resource Agency, because we don't want to just sell a pen or a mug or a set installation for, backdrop graphics or whatever. We need to make sure that whatever we're selling to that client makes sense. Does it make sense? Because we want them to come back. We want them to not waste their money. We don't want product being thrown away. So it's very important to us that what we sell makes sense for that client, and it's going to give them an ROI, because if they don't get an ROI, they're not coming back.
For sure. No, 100%. I think those are areas of a business that, especially no matter how big or small you are, when you spend the money in what you do, it's a representation of their business. It's a takeaway. I know we've been talking offline with what I do, how to upscale the way that we sign a loan right at the end of our opportunities. So it's so cool to hear. So obviously A, B, but what about C, D, E, F, and G, which is your people, right? How did you start to grow, and when did you make a decision to start to bring in teammates? Tell us a little bit about that, because our Go for CO community loves to hear about like the scaling side and maybe some challenges, some things that you really needed to realize once you started to bring in that first employee and or contractors that you work with.
So AB obviously stands for Amy and Brian.
Mhm.
And it was Brian's vision when we first got together and we were getting married. And he said, um, I feel like we should talk about our empire. And he's like, we can really do whatever it is that we want. And this was before we had any of these companies and real estate. And, he's like, let's just think of ourselves as unlimited. And what about the name AB Unlimited? And so the name kind of stuck. So when it came time in 2009 for Brian to open up the company, of course, he went with that name. As we started to get a little bit bigger, we thought, okay, we need to formalize this. We need to make sure we have all of the legal infrastructure that we need to protect, because at that time we were investing in real estate and we acquired a couple of properties and we wanted to make sure that they were protected. So we did all of that. And then eventually we moved our corporate headquarters from California to Nevada, which was a tax-friendly state. So we've been happy there. And plus we had some contracts that we had won in Nevada. So it made sense to move there. So a lot of our scaling decisions were made not so much on more clients and more revenue, but more like, how can we make the most of what we have and generate more off of that? And so, I remember when we were going through a particular crisis in 2015, I was able to assemble our tax attorney, our bankruptcy attorney, my two Toyota mentors, because I was going through the Toyota mentorship program at the time, our CPA, and one of our general counsel advisors. And I said, what are we doing? We're running and we're hitting walls. I'm tired of it. What can we do to stop this? So also at the time I was going through the Stanford program as well. And so I had a mentor, a really great mentor, who was the manager of a family fund with billions of dollars. And she was able to weigh in as well. And so the CPA says, okay, we're going to move the corporation from California to Nevada. And then we're going to do this, this, and this. And then the general counsel comes in and says, you're good, you're okay. But you need to get a hold of your staff, because you have some dead weight and you need to make sure that you have the right people in the right seats. And that's what I learned in the Stanford program, is making sure we didn't have any broken windows. And the book by Huggy Rao, Scaling Up Excellence, was huge in our lives, because we were studying under Huggy Rao in the Stanford program. And it pretty much outlined everything that we needed to address in terms of having a successful, efficient, and compelling company that's profitable. So we addressed that. And so half of our staff really wanted to pursue other things. So they left with blessings, and, they were welcome back anytime they wanted. But then all of a sudden, 6 months after we started this meeting, we had saved $250,000 in overhead inside of 6 months.
Wow.
So that was huge for us. And then again, went through a whole new growing pain. So then we were able to get a little bit better. So I think for me, the turning point in expansion was when we started to get a little better at our internal infrastructure and making sure that we're paying attention to our growing pains so that we can get to that next level and make sure that we're able to do so in a profitable way. Because a lot of businesses, they'll tank. And we didn't want to be that story. So in the pandemic is where we saw another growth spurt. We lost 80% of our contracts during pandemic because all of our clients are event-based and there were no events during the pandemic. So we had all this time in the world. And actually, John, that's where I met you. We've known each other almost 2021, 22, 2 years, because we met in Clubhouse in 2021. And I had this idea for golf, branded golf merchandise. Golf was the only thing that people could do during the pandemic. So I thought, how can I capitalize on this billion-dollar industry, right? Billion-dollar industry. And so I spoke with one of my manufacturers who's heavy in the golf equipment, and a 20-minute conversation turned into 2 hours. 4 weeks later, I had AB Golf. and it was up and running and operational with very little money. I think we invested $2,000 in opening AB Golf, used the same infrastructure model that we had for AB Unlimited, and got some advisors. We have our factories that we lean heavily on. They lend us their pro tourneys. So they're tourney pros. So now we have, staff that is knowledgeable in the golf industry, in the golf space. So I don't have to know anything about golf because they do. And so pretty soon we started with a couple of SEO start.
All right. So yeah, you were just talking about AB Golf and how you started to implement that side of the business. So take it away.
So we started AB Golf 4 weeks after I had a meeting with my golf manufacturer. And we started, I took a class in SEO and in digital marketing, because eventually we were going to have to hire a digital marketing agency, and I wanted to be able to hold them accountable. So I took this course to just get, my feet wet in digital marketing, and I placed a few Facebook ads, and then pretty soon we had 17 million views. And, all of a sudden tournaments from all over the nation were calling AB Golf and saying, hey, we need some branded golf swag for our tourney, and, this and that and the other. And so it literally was very grassroots, very organic, and then kind of blew up. So that was a lot of fun. And the other two companies that are in the back burner right now that we're developing also had their origin during the pandemic as well, because we had all this time to create, and that's the fruit of that labor.
I love it. I'm very curious too, and I think our community would learn from. So, what was one of the reasons that you separated AB Golf from AB Unlimited? Was there any strategy? I'm sure there was, but was there a specific reason behind that?
No specific reason. It just made sense. We did talk to our CPA and our lawyers about it, and they seemed to think that that was the best thing to do. Is to separate the companies. We have acquired some other promotional product companies as well since the pandemic, and all of them are separate legal entities. And one in particular is a legacy promo company, and the owner was very dear to us, and has since passed away. And when he sold us the company, it was very important to us to maintain his legacy, maintain the name. Nothing changes. It's not a part of AB Unlimited. It just happens to be owned by the same owners.
Neat. So, that's another area of cool focus on our channel, right? So, I think we talked at dinner a little bit about the kind of workout buyout scenarios,
Yeah.
in seller financing, those types of things. So, tell us a little bit about, obviously the pandemic was trying for all types of businesses. You had your own challenges, but you then rose from the Phoenix and boom, started buying business stuff. So some people must be asking themselves, in Go for CEO community, you're probably saying, well, if you're struggling or if you're losing 80% of your clientele, how the heck are you buying business, right? Stuff like that. So tell us a little bit about how those structures, at least from a perspective that you could share without giving us all the insights, but was it workout buyouts? Was it seller financing? How did you start to strategize that, even that acquisition piece?
Well, making sure that we're poised to be able to act on opportunities as they come up. That's our mantra. That's our internal mantra. And that's something that Brian Williams came up with. He says, I want to make sure that when opportunity presents itself, that we're in a position to be able to act on it. So, even as far back as the pandemic, when we lost all these contracts, luckily, because we have clients that we're their primary choice of vendor, they have to use us because we have an exclusive contract with them overall. And so we had put ourselves in a position to be able to weather that storm. And it was touch and go for a second. Every 3 months in 2020 and 2021, we met and we talked with our financial advisors, and we said, okay, this is the situation we're in. Will we survive the next 3 months? And they said, yes, you're good. Okay, see you in June. June comes. This is a position we're in. This is our revenue. Can we survive the next 3 months? Yes, you're good. See you in September. And we did that for a year and a half. But it wasn't until the turning point in June of 2021 where we thought, oh my gosh, are we going to have to sell the company? Because we aren't seeing improvement. And, for us as a household, we were okay because we had investment properties that were keeping us afloat. relied on, credit card, relied on this, relied on that. So we did have some other things that could help our household. But as far as our company, I remember June 2021, we actually considered selling the company. And then all of a sudden, July 1, new fiscal year, and our biggest client said, okay, we're seeing some hybrid events. We need some swag, what can we do? And then it went on from there. But interestingly enough, in 2021 and 2020, the groups that I had belonged to, the programs that I attended had really strong alumni components. So they put on webinars 3-4 times a week. I must have attended 4 webinars a week for a solid year, And what I started doing, besides panicking, because we didn't want to panic, we looked at who was attending these webinars. Who are attending these webinars? Then we took down lists of names. Okay, started conversation. The relationships that I made in 2021 paid off in 2022. 2022 was our biggest year, and that was even before pandemic. And that's because the relationships that I made by attending those webinars became clients in 2022. And we increased our client roster by 30% by attending those webinars. So that was, it's a big number. So that really helped us weather the storm. 2022 was such a big year for us that it actually made up for almost some of 2021 and 2020. And there was an individual actually in our Clubhouse community who I worked with for about 6 months and said, hey, I want to recap that money that we would have had in 2020. I need to do something additional so I can help bring back that money, because, that it wasn't a pretty year. It was frightful. It was awful. So I did do that. So again, we just put our heads to the ground, grind away, did what we needed to do. And, when you're in your home for a year and a half, like we didn't go anywhere during the pandemic. Expenses for us went down. We cut where we could to make sure we weren't hemorrhaging any type of expenses. So we were very careful with what we did. And our marketing expenditure for the company obviously decreased as well, because we weren't going anywhere. And people preferred the Zoom meetings. So that means that our expenses in travel cut down quite a little bit. So being creative in our expenses really, really held us afloat. But there were some times where we were like, wow, I don't know if we're going to make it.
It's interesting, right? I mean, you are sharing such an interesting way to pivot within the actual moment, right? And I think Go for CEO community, if you really take a listen to the last minute or two there's some really nice nuggets of how to think, right? How to proceed. You put this council together that every quarter you were just basically checking in, making sure that you had a pulse of could you maintain, could you move forward. Give us a little bit of insight, only because I do want to trail you back to the question, which I love the insight that you just gave, but the acquisition part. So did the acquisition start then in June of 21 once you kind of resurfaced and felt strong, or was it in the midst that you also saw opportunities to then bring in those, maybe it could have been failing, competitors, those types of things?
Well, in 2020, we knew that people were struggling, and we knew just like the fallout of the crash in 2007 with real estate, and people were trying to offload properties right and left. And some people took advantage of that, and that's how they built up their portfolio. Sure. Same kind of thing with the pandemic. We knew that there were going to be some of our peers in the industry that weren't going to make it. So we started preparing, we started planning. What would it look like if we were to do an acquisition? What would it look like if we bought someone's book of business? And so we started thinking in terms of that. And then an opportunity with a very good friend of ours had fallen ill. And we talked now and then, hey, if you need help, please let us know. We're there for you. And, he says, okay. And we were considering actually doing the transaction in 2023, 2024. We did not anticipate doing a 2022 transaction, but unfortunately, God has different ideas, and he became really sick. And so we immediately dropped everything that we did. that we were doing. We happened to be in Canada at the time, and we flew to Texas and met with this family and talked about what he would like to see happen. How can we structure this? And I was honest. I said, we're not prepared to write a check right now in for this company. This is at least 6 months to a year ahead of our timeline that he and I had discussed. And he's like, okay, let's do it this way. And what we ended up doing was making sure that his family and his heirs are taken care of. And we did a step up structure. I guess you could call it seller financing, I suppose. But basically, his heirs will continue to receive a portion of the profits for 3 years. And it was a beautiful deal because it was important to me that his family was taken care of and that his legacy was continued. But it's also, we had to look at it from a business point of view. What can we do at the time?
Sure.
And it worked out beautifully for everyone. And I gave this advice to another colleague of mine who's considering selling her company. And I said, there are all different ways you can structure a deal. You don't have to write a check. You don't have to be scared about, oh my gosh, what can I do? And how do I do this? And I said, there's just be honest, be authentic, and write a list of what it is that you want to have accomplished. In a perfect world, what would you like to see? And then match that with another column on a piece of paper that what they're offering. And is there alignment? Is there alignment in that? So now we're looking at companies that have values that align with ours. And, what is it that makes this particular acquisition special? Can we grow it? What opportunity is there? And so there's different things to look at besides, I just want to buy this company. For what? For us, we don't just want to acquire for the sake of acquisition. We want to make sure that we can do something, and we can do something for the community as well.
Very strategic. No, I love it. I love it. As we end our interviews, we typically go through CEO, right? Which is client experience engagement. I used to call it employee engagement, but I really thought engagement kind of is a broader sense of how your vendors, how your employees, how your partners, all work with each other, your funding partners, all that type of stuff, and operational excellence for so CEO. But I do have to ask you this because I think it's really interesting. Throughout this whole interview, you've shared, I went to this webinar, I got this coach, I went to the Stanford thing, I went to this, what's the financial institution that you just thought,
Goldman Sachs, 10,000
Goldman
small.
Sachs, right? I mean, Goldman Sachs is obviously a big name. So can you give us 30 seconds? Because I think that will be our next interview. I'd love to go through that process that you go through, because I think entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders, all of us, right, should always have a learning mindset, right? It should always be a growing mindset so that we're never dying, right? We're not becoming, a ripe banana. We should always be green and growing. But it's so huge that you mentioned that so many times. And I know when we had dinner, you challenged me to some things. So I'm looking into those foundations and stuff like that. But can you give us 30 seconds on how do you determine, you're so busy, you're trying to build a business, when are you finding time, and why did you pick those areas? Were they to just refine certain skills, or I guess that would be a huge part of this interview.
One of our third mantras and core values internally for Brian and myself is bigger, better, faster, stronger. And we don't know everything. And we've made huge mistakes with our company. We've had some huge victories with our company. And honestly, we don't give up mindset. So these educational programs were important for us because we didn't know what we didn't know, starting with that first mentor from Disney. And then, we became minority certified, women business owned certified. And all of a sudden, these organizations are there to help us. They're there to provide education and opportunities for us to get better at what we do and run our companies better. So I first did the Goldman Sachs program. A friend of a friend mentioned it, a woman that I highly respect, one of my first mentors. And so I did that program. Had no idea what was going to happen with that program, but That program was the best thing. It took basically a 2-year MBA program into 4 months and taught by some of the best instructors with curriculum that's by Babson and Harvard. Sign me up, and it was free, you know? And then the Southern California Minority Development Council awarded me a scholarship that was funded by Wells Fargo for me to go to Dartmouth for a week and take the Tuck Executive Education Program, you know, a $10,000, $15,000 program that I got to go and attend and meet with 80 other entrepreneurs and learn from, you know, Dartmouth Tuck School of Business staff. That was huge. And then the Toyota mentorship program came along, and that was when I needed it most. And that was a year-long mentorship program. They chose 5 women-owned companies in the nation, and we were one of them. And we got to have the greatest minds at Toyota help us make our company better, bigger, faster, stronger. And if it weren't for, and then the Stanford Latino Business Action Network also had a program at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, you know, meeting professors like Jerry Porras and Huggy Rao and, you know, all kinds of great minds helping us make our company bigger, better, faster, stronger. You know that saying, you can go yourself, you can go quite a distance, but you can go a better distance, a greater distance if you have a village with you. And it takes a village to run a company. It takes a village to run a 7-figure company.
No doubt. No doubt. I love it. I love it. It's so impactful. And the next time you're on, I'd love to really kind of dedicate maybe 15, 20 minutes to that specific area. I think it's really interesting when you have those opportunities. I think a lot of people don't even know that that should be a part of your daily and let's say yearly business plan per se, right? To have these sections of times, and maybe even like you said, you know, you got some scholarships, got some opportunities through some associations, you learned about things, and then you're willing to plug in pretty quickly. So, you know, so
also important. It's also important to give back, because I decided early on the mistakes that I made. It was important that other companies didn't make those same mistakes, because mistakes that we made, people could have gone bankrupt, lose their homes, affect their families, affect their communities. It's a circle, John. It's a circle. And so when you have a healthy company, you have happy staff, the staff go back home into their communities and they're happy people, that makes their communities happy. It's a circle that I want to continue. And one of the things that we started in the pandemic is called the Promo Lawyer. I'm a licensed attorney in California. I knew things that helped benefit our company, but you know, legal services is such a scary thing, and people think, I can't afford a lawyer, I can't afford this, I can't afford that, and they're making terrible mistakes that affect their company, that affect their livelihoods. And so we started the Promo Lawyer as a passion project to help those small distributor owners with affordable legal advice and mentorship to help make their companies strong, make their companies have a foundation that is supportive and it's not going to break. So giving back with the knowledge is super, super important for every entrepreneur.
I love it. It's one of the reasons I do this channel, and I didn't want to do humongous names because I think there's enough of that in social media. I wanted to do names like Amy Williams that maybe aren't known worldwide, right? And hopefully this impacts someone, could be in, who knows? I mean, you know, the video can be seen anywhere around the world, and to hear your voice and the challenges, the understanding, the wisdom that comes from the way that you just shared is pretty impactful. So, you know, CEO, right? So it's our ending last 3 questions: client experience, engagement, and operational excellence. So from a client experience, just, you know, 10,000 foot level value add proposition when it comes to AB, right? And AB golf and everything that you guys do. What is the client experience look like to you, maybe in 30, 60 seconds?
Client experience has been drilled down so that it makes the client not aggravated. That's the whole thing. So communication is very important, and it's something that we strive to perfect. We're by no means perfect in it, but we strive to perfect communication between us and the client so they know exactly what's going on with their project. They know exactly what they're anticipating. Their project's delivered on time, and their invoice matches the budget that they gave us to begin with.
Sweet. Engagement, it could be with your vendors, like you only have 30 of them. I'm assuming there's some really cool engagement there. Your employees, obviously your partner, i.e. your husband as well, and business partner. What's engagement look like for you?
Engagement starts with a smile, and it starts with a kind word. And we've just actually implemented an even more uh, stressing this more with our staff and with our vendors. So it literally starts with a smile, whether it's on the phone, in your voice, or on a Zoom call, whatever. Every email, every email to an individual, whether it's a supplier, a client, or a potential vendor, whatever. If it's the first communication of the day, we start that email communication with, "How are you? How are you doing? How's your week going? How's your day going? How's your family?" We just had a vendor, we just found out she's getting married this weekend and we didn't know. And, if we hadn't started our email with, "How are you doing? What's going on in your life? How are your kids?" That's the kind of relationship that we want. That's the engagement that we want. We want to see our clients and the people that we interact with, vendors, clients, whomever, as human beings. We want them to see us as human beings. And so
Love it.
engagement's really important.
Operational excellence, we end with, what are maybe some tools, some things that you've learned throughout the years that make what you do better, smoother, simpler to do as far as day-to-day operations?
Ops is my jam. I am so into ops, and that's how I started mentoring other small businesses, was because I have fine-tuned ops. And so in my space, in terms of promotional products, I know the ops for that. There are 11 steps from beginning to end. And, once you're outside of those 11 steps, you're not as profitable. If you're, 25 to 50 steps, even less profitable. If you're over 50 touches on a product, the product's tanked. You're not profitable at all. You're actually losing money. So for us, we really had to fine tune 1 through 11. And are we in that world? Are we staying in that world? Tools that we use, honestly, we subscribe to an industry tool to manage our production, but there is not one software out there that does exactly what I want it to do. I mean, I find that with software, the developers they just put so many bells and whistles that they fall in love with that they forget to take a step back and say, okay, what is the actual necessity here? And that's one thing that I'm considering mortgaging my house so that I can spend $250,000 developing software that truly does what we really need it to do. But simple tools like a digital art library. If you're in the graphic space, a digital art library, Calendly, Zoom, things that make your life easier definitely are a good investment in terms of how you run your operations. Obviously, security, cybersecurity is important. So making sure that whatever it is that you're doing, no matter what type of company you have, that your internet services, your security on all your files, things like that has to be taken into account. And we have a really good expert in our circle that's all she does. And so we always call her, "Hey, what would happen if?" So you kind of, it's so industry specific for us. I would just say one of the first things that I did to get to operational excellency is I went to my bigger, better, faster, stronger competitors and I invited them out for coffee. And I said, "These are my pain points. How do you deal with them?" And they were willing. They were willing to share with me what they do and how they do it and how they got successful. And I would suggest that to achieve that operational excellence, find out who's in your space, who can you take out to coffee and pick their brain and ask them, "How do you handle these things?" And then you'll know.
What a cool final message, right? It made me think of a gentleman I follow, Andy Frisella. He talks about that every day he actually talks to 5 or 6 of his competitors that are bigger than him, that are smaller than him, that he's giving knowledge. But it's funny, they've all become great friends. And it's interesting that you did that. You were proactive about asking these more successful people in your same space people think that as an entrepreneur, it's me against the world when it doesn't have
Mm-mm.
to be. It really, truly doesn't have to be. So, Amy Williams, thank you so much for coming on the Go for CEO channel. Let's give everybody an access point. How do you like to be communicated with? LinkedIn, what are some ways that people, and if they are interested in what you guys do and are the type of company that you want to do business with, how could they reach you?
They can reach me on LinkedIn. That would be the most preferred channel of messaging me, and we can take it from there.
Awesome. Well, hey, super excited. Hey, if you have not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit that smash button, that like button, and the subscribe button. Let's get this channel growing and moving and shaking. Wonderful in entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders, minds of the world like Amy Williams are on this and doing some big, big things. We might have to bring in Brian just to see if he adds any value, which I'm sure obviously he does. But awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for coming on, and we
Thank
appreciate
you
you.
for having me.